All right, well, we're here with Hillary, Ben, and Paul from Mortgage Choice. And today we wanted to chat a bit about how you can invest for the first time. So let's say I own a property and I've owned it for 2 to 3 years, 5 years, and I'm thinking, all right, what's the next step in my financial plan? And we know, I read a report the other day where it was saying that a large portion of investors in Australia have a single property, if not 2 properties, and they're just mum and dads trying to build a retirement income, trying to build their financial future. It's not this big landlord, big business, these uber wealthy people who are investing in property. It's actually people who own their own home and just trying to build a retirement income. So what is one of the most common, popular tools that someone who owns their own property can use to then invest?
Yeah, really good question, Hillary. And you're right. It's investing in an investment property is not the domain of the really wealthy people. It's actually your mum and dad and your average income earning professionals or people in Australia. And it's big. There's millions of people that have done this successfully to build their wealth. Now, this is general advice. This is not specific advice, so general advice only for those who may be listening. But fundamentally how it works is, if someone say you've got a $600,000 property, I'll get the numbers really simple. Let's say your mortgage is $300,000. So you bought it a few years ago, might have gone up a little bit in value from your first home. So you can actually access 20% of the equity that you've got in that property. So if you've got a $600,000 property that's worth that, a $300,000 mortgage, so you can take the equity up to $480,000 less what you owe, $300,000.
Okay.
So all of a sudden, rather than putting in cash savings towards your new property, if it makes sense, you can use $180,000 of equity release from the value of your current property for a contribution towards a new investment property.
Right.
And it's actually a really good scheme. So definitely talk to your accountant and professional advisors about the strategy, because there's a few implications for doing that. By and large, if done well, it works for a whole host of reasons. For me, the main thing when people consider buying an investment using the equity in their home is that it's important that they buy a good quality asset that is going to grow in value. Now, with respect to some apartments, I probably wouldn't buy an investment property in a high-rise inner city apartment, for example.
And why is that?
Because over time, research has shown throughout Australia, and probably, not necessarily the world, but in Australia, that a freestanding home on a bit of land, a property that you can actually make some improvements to yourself, like maybe paint, carpet, garden, the landscaping, things like that, where you can not spend a lot of money, but improve the value. And typically those sorts of properties increase in value more than for example, a high-rise apartment in a city over time.
Okay.
The research has proven that. So we say to people, get your property advice, get your property advisors, talk to your accountant. But what the advocates that we deal with, and they're really good buyers advocates to help source investment properties for people. They talk about A-grade properties. They're pretty much not guaranteed. Nothing's ever guaranteed in this life, by the way, to grow. But put simply, buying a home on a bit of land that's close to shops, schools, transport, growing population, reasonable levels of employment. All the fundamentals, demand from renters. There might be some hospitals and schools. They employ people, lots of people, and investors. You got to remember that investors, when they buy investment property, it's actually not to live in. This isn't a pure investment. You got to think about things a bit differently. Take the emotion out of it. Where am I going to get growth? Will I be able to secure a tenant? How much rent will the tenant pay? Will that cover most or all of the cost of the mortgage, for example? Should I do interest-only repayments? Should I do principal and interest repayments? Nice. So we model all these scenarios in front of people. And also people still, whilst they might have some cash reserves, maybe keep those cash reserves just in case there's a gap in a tenant moving out and the next person moving in.
And
So
I think
are they
that's
covered
important,
and
yeah.
things like that we talk through those sorts of cash flow issues with people. So, it's really important they do the planning. But it's very exciting for people to do it. We've got some clients that have now got 20 properties.
Wow.
And we've helped them to, gradually over a period of years, once they buy the right property, just keep accessing more equity to buy their next property. Now, I'm not saying everyone should try and aspire to own 20 properties, but it's certainly a very legitimate strategy, starting out with your first investment property using equity that you've already got in a current property.
So talk me through the difference between, and I mean, I know the banks went through a couple of years ago where they were tightening up on interest only and they didn't want to approve anything that was interest only. Talk to me about where the lenders are right now, what their thinking is right now about principal and interest and interest only. So paying off the principal of the loan and the interest or just the interest, and what the strategy might be behind an interest only as an investor.
Yeah, really good question. So you're right, Hillary, a couple of years ago, the prudential regulator called APRA, that oversees banks, they imposed a slightly higher capital regime on banks for interest-only lending. So for investors, pay a higher rate, usually around 0.3% higher.
Okay. Yeah.
So, for example, if you're paying 5.9 on your owner-occupier property, if you're an investor, you're paying 6.2, thereabouts on average, so a bit higher, and that's still in place. Having said that, banks are very, very keen to lend money because if they lend money, they make profit.
Right.
It's simple.
Okay.
And obviously, people got to meet their minimum qualifying criteria. So, to your question around interest only and principal and interest, so if I use that example earlier, if a person has a $300,000 mortgage and it's their own occupier property, our advice to them, and we often work with their accountants, is to pay that down with principal and interest repayments. So that's their foundation. They build as much equity as they possibly can, and that owner-occupied property should in time continue to grow, and the mortgage should continue to come down. Now, if they buy an investment property, well, that's a different kettle of fish. Interest-only repayments is quite a legitimate strategy for most investors. And the reason is it keeps their contractual repayments down. And typically speaking, not always, the tenant, the rent they're paying virtually can cover the interest-only repayment. Now, personally, and again, this is general advice only, people need to consider interest only, because don't forget the loan balance is not coming down. So but where it does work quite well is if the loan balance is staying the same with interest only repayments, but the property value goes up. So if you buy well, it's a great strategy. If you don't buy well and the property value, say, for example, stays the same or even reduces potentially, don't forget property does go up and down like shares every day. But it's maybe not necessarily recorded that way, but that's the reality. So for the right sort of growth asset, growth property, interest only is really good because it benefits cash flow. Now, I'm not giving tax advice. There's also some tax advantages as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's actually a really good strategy, and that's what most people do. Having said that, of recent times, I've been really impressed with the younger generation. Common myth is they're a bit sort of free,
I heard you say
free
this the other
spending and things
day.
like that. I've quite a substantial portion of our investment clients also want to repay their investment loans with principal and interest repayments, which is really good. So they might be earning some good money now, and they just want to pay it down. And that's also a good strategy. Again, I encourage people to talk to their accountant, still claim the interest. Whether it's principal and interest or interest only. So again, we run the scenarios, both scenarios, interest only repayments and principal and interest repayments on investment with the client, and strongly suggest they talk to their accountant as well.
And I think a lot of first-time investors are just worried about getting caught out financially. They'll get into it. Yes, we can afford the investment. Then I've got maintenance costs and tax, all of that jazz. So I think when you're putting together a bit of a view of what an investment loan could look like, is there an option to kind of make it a lot more conservative so that when, as an investor, if I'm fairly debt averse and I'm not, do you build it to my appetite for risk and my appetite for investing?
Yeah,
is
definitely.
that something you can personalize for me?
Absolutely, we need to personalize that.
Yeah.
And you sort of got to almost like do some risk analysis. So what if? What if? And Ben does this with interest rates. So what if interest rates go up 2 more times just after you purchased? What if the property is vacant? There's no tenant for 3 months.
Because that is really scary.
Now that's less likely in this environment because the rental market is pretty much full in Australia. So there's very little gaps. But definitely talk through the risk. Have a cash reserve. 100% have a cash reserve. All these what ifs, and as responsible brokers under responsible lending, we're obliged to ask those questions. And even under responsible lending, it's really good these days in Australia because the banks have to add a whole 3% to repay an investment loan. So if the interest rate is 6.2, for example, on an investment loan, the banks are assessing people at 9.2%. So as if the rate would go that high. So there's a bit of risk management in those.
That's nice to know that it's kind of the padding's built in, the buffer's built in for me. So that's really nice to know. Is there a difference between, obviously when you're investing in property, we'd always recommend that, you're thinking about your long-term strategy, whether you're looking at capital growth, so you want to sell it in the future for more than you bought it, or you're looking for a rental income. What if I want to flip it? What if I want to flip it? Is there like a difference in finance options there? Like how do you fit the financial options with my long-term investment strategy?
Well, being married to an architect, Hillary, you're very capable of building those sorts of properties.
But I think my question is more around, there's so many different pathways for investing. And there's I think financially people are kind of creating their own future nowadays. Like they're thinking, what can I do to build the life that I want in the future?
It's a great question. Have you been watching too much of The Block? Like, I love The Block. I think it's fantastic. But gee, I'll tell you what, they renovate and they build these places in world record time in amazing budgets. And I'm thinking, really, how did you do that? It looks so easy. If it was that easy,
makes it look easy, doesn't it?
But flipping a property it's a perfectly legitimate strategy. There are pros and cons to doing so. And again, that's why we always say talk to your accountant. You're personalising it. Well, in case there's any capital gains tax or other issues with doing so. I've seen it work well. I've seen it work not so well. But I think it gets back to again, as brokers, we got to listen to people's objectives. Absolutely, we can help people do that. If flipping's a strategy over time, we can, but we must talk about risk. Absolutely. Because the last thing we ever want anyone to do is it to go pear-shaped and end in tears. So there's lots of ways to plan around what if I sell at a loss? What happens then? Will you be okay? Well, okay, we'll need a plan B. We need a plan C. We need this risk mitigant.
And that's why it's so important, I think, to have a mortgage broker, no matter what the plan is. So whatever your custom plan is, whatever you want to do for the future, having a mortgage broker on your side, because you guys do this day in and day out. You live and breathe property finance. So being able to come to someone and not have to pay for the advice, I think is really important. And as a society, mortgage brokers play such a valuable part in us as a community, being able to almost level the playing field between homeowner, everyday Aussies who want to buy an investment property and who want to buy their first home and who want to renovate, and whatever you guys want to do, you're leveling the playing field between the lenders and those everyday Aussies.
Yeah, we do like to think we play a very important part in helping Australians do that. And that's why 70% of people, come to a broker these days. And like in overseas, it's now 80 and 90. So it's growing. It's growing a lot. And it's that Aussie dream, isn't it, Hillary? But we also can lend for people to release equity to, invest in other growth assets such as shares and managed funds, for example.
Oh, wow.
If that makes sense. But we can't, as brokers, we're not licensed to provide financial advice. But nonetheless, we do lots of that sort of lending where they've already got that advice. And it's a legitimate strategy. And again, we still talk about risk and help them on that journey. And we, because a lot of people, they get this idea, they go to a barbecue and they cook in the barbecue and turn in the sausages, and someone says to them, oh, well, there's an investment property, in Ballarat. Oh, that's lovely. They make it sound so easy. There's a fair bit of planning in the process. I wouldn't say it's difficult, but it's a lot of planning around risk and appetite and what's the right property and is it going to grow and all those things. So you really, really do need to get some good advice from a broker and other professionals.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know that many people would think to come to a mortgage broker to release funds to invest in shares. I don't think people would think
we
about
actually
that.
do a fair bit of it.
Wow.
Yeah. So once again, it's a growth asset, and it's people. Don't forget, people have got themselves to that position by paying down their mortgage.
Yeah.
And our advice to people, and Ben's really good at it, is helping people to pay down their mortgage first. Once that's your foundation, then you can look to do other things with your money.
All right. Well, Ben, I wanted to ask if you had, over the last 12 months, what's a great story? I think we've got to inspire people out there. What's a great story you've had about an investor, first-time investor, and how you've been able to strategize to almost tailor the investment loan that you're going to provide, suggest to them, recommend to them, that you're personalizing those recommendations to their risk appetite and to their finances.
I think a more common one for me, especially over the last 12 months, has been rent vesting. So, you got first home buyers who want to get in the market. They want to buy a property where they want to live in. They're probably renting in a nice area like South Yarra, Paran, whatever it may be. And they work out their borrowing capacity and they figure out, okay, I can't quite afford to live the dream in the southeast suburbs.
But I don't want to give it up.
And I want to get in the market. So what we've been recommending is maybe continue to rent where you want to live your lifestyle. Obviously, it's quite important, be near work, whatever it may be. But to get in the market, maybe think about buying an investment property, like what you said before, maybe in Ballarat, a freestanding house with the goal of building equity, hopefully get a little bit of growth, pay down the balance. You've got someone renting out the property, paying down most of your mortgage. And then eventually when, a few years down the line, your income grows, you've built a little bit of equity in the property, it's gone up, leverage that equity out and then buy in the area that you can afford.
Now, you had a great story of someone buying an investment property, regional Victoria?
Yes. They bought in Kangaroo Flat.
So talk us through what the strategy was and why they bought in Kangaroo Flat.
Well, great question, Hillary. Their borrowing capacity was, let's say there was about 600,000, right? And they were looking at properties, and basically what they could afford was an apartment, mostly high density apartments in where they wanted to live. But like Paul said before, they wanted capital growth. So we didn't think, as historically, there probably wasn't enough growth in those areas. So they looked at potentially buying a freestanding house in Ballarat. Now, they ended up buying a 3-bedroom house in Ballarat, and they've got heaps of growth out of it. So that property that particular person bought has gone up $160,000 in 2 years. So they bought a freestanding house. That's incredible. They've got someone paying off most of their mortgage, and now they've got equity. And, they're not quite ready yet, but they're going to eventually pull that equity out and buy, in a suburb that they want to live.
On whatever your client wants to achieve, which I love because, you get so passionate about it, I think, as mortgage brokers, seeing people achieve what they want to achieve, which is so good.
It is, it's special and it's very satisfying. And like I said, you want to have your trusted advisors behind you, have a good conveyancer, have a good mortgage broker, have a good buyer's advocate, got all these people that are giving you advice to help you with your goal. And I think that's the best thing. I love what I do, it's the best feeling.
I love that. And so if we're talking about rent vesting,
yes.
Can you use the first home buyer incentives available from the government when you're rent vesting? I think that's an important question.
No, you can't use the home guarantee scheme, unfortunately.
Good to know.
Yes, you can't use that. You don't get access to the 10 grand grant for buying a new property because it's an investment property.
Yeah.
But
it doesn't mean the strategy doesn't work great for first home buyers.
Exactly right. Yeah, and it's fit for people that are looking to buy, capital growth and all that sort of stuff. And it just allows people to buy, a good growth asset, and then obviously keep living their lifestyle, keep renting where they want to live. and
Yeah.
get in the market.
And that's why personalised strategy is so important, because while you can't get the first home guarantee, it allows you to continue living where you want to live,
Correct.
then building equity. And they've obviously bought somewhere amazing that's had this incredible growth over 2 years.
Yeah.
What about buyers advocates? Do they help with investment properties, or is that something that only first home buyers would use?
Yeah, I'd highly recommend using a buyer's advocate for investment properties. Over the last few months, there's been a little bit of low stock of properties in Melbourne, so people have been struggling to buy. There's low stock. There's a lot of people still keen to buy, especially investors. So we've had some good relationships with advocates that have really helped a lot of our clients. And I think they're worth their weight in gold. You've obviously got to pay for them. You can be quite expensive, but at the end of the day, they might get you a property in a better area, probably pay a little bit less than what you would have paid anyway, and they take the emotion out of it.
Yeah.
People are, it's daunting. Imagine going to auction for your first property. You probably don't know what you're doing. You're a bit scared to bid. You've got the real estate agent.
It's quite dramatic.
Yeah, it's a lot. So
Auctions are quite dramatic.
to have someone that is there and working for you and knows your budget and your objectives and is going to go out.
Done it 1,000 times before.
Exactly right. Work in your best interest. So yeah, I think they're worth their weight in gold.
All right, so Paul, I thought we might finish with a little bit of inspiration. Can you give us a story of a first-time investor that you've helped in the past 12 months?
First-time investor I've helped in. Oh my God, I've got lots of them. Absolutely, lots of them. So, okay, here's one. So one of our clients in Richmond owns a good house in Richmond, worth just over $1 million. Got the mortgage down quite well over the past few years, earning really good money. His accountant said to him, you're paying a lot of tax and you need to think about your future investment objectives. So he came to me and we did 3 things. He, on the advice of his accountant and a buyer's advocate interstate, he has purchased a property in Western Australia in a suburb I've never heard of. And it's apparently a really, really good growth suburb. Wow. And on Friday, he purchased a second property, this time in Queensland.
Wow.
Again, never heard of the suburb, but looked at both properties, get a really strong rental yield, all the area demographics. And I read the advocate's report. It was really exciting for this guy who, earning good money. He didn't even physically inspect the properties himself. He briefed the advocate.
So no emotion for these properties at all.
This is a pure investment play, Hilary.
It's great.
And then finally, the third aspect, and I had dialogue with his accountant and his financial planner. And the final part was he's going to see whatever he had left over in his borrowing capacity and buy some shares. Buy some direct equities on the advice of his financial planner. Now, we did all the lending part. That was actually really enjoyable because this is a long-term play for him. He's got his mortgage down in Richmond. He's used all the equity. No cash was put into these transactions, just equity that he built up through his hard work. Right. And do you know what? It's a really good strategy. He can afford it. His debt-to-income ratio is low. He's bought in, and look, time will tell, but he's bought in well-researched, good areas with strong future growth prospects. So it would have been very easy for him to buy something in, not saying wrong with Cremorne, just your local neighbourhood, for example. But he didn't. And we're seeing more and more investors now think about things differently. Like about Ben's Kangaroo Ground Ballarat example is another one. People are buying in regional parts of South Australia, Western Australia, Queensland, regional Victoria. There's some really good buys. So people are thinking a bit more broadly about what's my objective here. It's about buying a growth asset. Yeah. It doesn't actually matter where you buy.
Keeping the end goal in mind.
Yeah. So that's been it's very rewarding as a broker to help people, bring those plans to life. Realestate.com did some, and I'm fortunate enough to do a little podcast with Cam Cusher from realestate.com. He's or REA Group. It's on Prop Track. And realestate.com about those suburbs where they believe there's going to be good population growth. Now, again, I'm not a property expert, but I'm just repeating what these guys do, and their research is really well worth reading because it can highlight opportunities that you would have never thought of. So where's the next booming suburb? You know, sometimes there's the surrounding suburbs that have had their run for the last 5 years. I've not heard of them. You may not have heard of them, Hillary or Ben, but they're there and they're going really, really well.
It's
so,
really good.
you know, do your research and like this person was able to do, leveraging the equity into investments. Really excited. He is so excited.
That's so exciting.
And has not even inspected the properties personally.
Yeah.
And I think one of the other really great tools that I love on realestate.com.au is the suburb profile.
Yeah.
So if you just type into Google like Cheltenham suburb profile and it pops up with like average rent for 2-3 bedroom units and houses and it shows you past 5 years performance. It's very cool.
Yeah.
I did see that and I've been sending people the link.
It's very cool.
It does. And do you know what? I say to people, that's part of your research. You have to sit down at night time after work and go through that website. And it's so insightful. You know, the data that REA is producing is really strong. So, I think it can really help make an informed decision.
Absolutely.
We can do all the stuff like getting the right loan for them at the right rate and going through their repayments and cash flows and all that sort of stuff. But they've still got to find that, a good property is going to grow in value.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things you said about that story, which I really loved, was that you talked to the advisor, you talked to the accountant, and you worked together as a team to get this client what he needed to really improve his financial future, which I love. I love that so much.
No, it's good. And we learn as well because we've got to continue our learning as brokers and it's great. We learn from accountants, you learn from buyers advocates and other professionals. I love it. We love working with them.
Yeah, it's so good. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ben and Paul, for all that information for anyone who's considering buying and investing for the first time, which I think is really cool. It's scary, but great to have you guys on the team. For anyone out there. So looking forward to the next one.
Awesome.
We'll see what we
Pleasure,
come up with.
Hillary.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Hillary.
guys.